Hello, D. Alfred Ostrowski here. Welcome to day 4 of my 20-day Ethereum challenge. In this recording, I'm going to be presenting a demo/tutorial of working with Solidity events. I'll be expanding on the Hello World DAPP application, not going to be changing it at all. I'm only going to be introducing a means by which you can externally monitor the events that are being generated from this very simplistic Hello World smart contract. If you're not familiar with the application, I've explained it in the day 2. And if you're not familiar with the installation, you can go to the day 0. In either case, everything is backed up to the associated GitHub that'll be posted with this video, as you see in the inset here, with the day 4. I'll be reading, as usual, through my README install instructions. And I'll be stepping through cut paste. Okay, so I've started the C5 instance, once again, following the usual format. And I have 3 putty terminals that are up and running. The first of which is going to be used, as usual, to run my hard hat blockchain simulation. The second, to run the React.js application to run my decentralized application, the DAPP. And then the third, where I'm going to monitor the smart contract using the ethers.js library from the command line. Now I'm going to vary from past demonstrations that I've done on this channel, where this is being run independent of the smart contract and of the deployment. I'm going to be using the provider method provided with ethers.js and the JsonRpc method that's associated. We'll go through that. It's just going to be about 8+ lines of code to do that. I'm going to be running it from the command line, but you can easily run it in a script. And this will be a nice way to variation compared to the last presentation tutorial that I've done on this. But if you want to see the other variation, I'm going to include that tutorial, which gets into a little bit more detail and also shows how you can take a look at the log files that are written to by the Solidity events and how to track them through by using the address that's generated on any type of transaction with the blockchain. So without further ado, okay, let's just jump into it. And this is going to be a little bit shorter than most videos. And I'm going to bring up my terminal. And again, I'm just following through the instructions on my README install, as I usually do. And I'm going to bring this up in my second screen, but you can easily go to this page and hopefully follow through just in the same as before. So one thing to be aware of when you're starting up the application or restarting an instance that you've already had up and running, the DNS is going to change. So you're going to have to change that appropriately or validate that it's the appropriate DNS. So I'm in the project directory, which I've named Hello, and I'm going to edit the hard hat config as I'm going to have to update that DNS. Okay, so I'm going to pull that in from my Amazon site. Not only like what I've done before, I'm going to be changing in the decentralized app as well before I run it. So put it back in here, make sure it's added appropriately, save that, and that should be good to go. Okay. So at this point, I can even just start up my hard hat localized blockchain. And I'm going to do the same command here. I'm just cut pasting from my notes on px hard hat node host name. And again, pull in my DNS. And you may have this already up from the day 2. And again, if you haven't, you can take a look at the videos, but I don't want to repeat the information. Okay, so that way we can keep these videos short and add some brevity, okay, as we move forward. So the blockchain's up and running on my 20 accounts. and everything looks appropriate. Next thing I want to do, my smart contract is already in place. And again, that's backed up to the associated GitHub as well, if you want to double check that. As well as in the day two GitHub, there's really no difference between the two. And here I am going to do the deployment of my smart contract from the second terminal and just cut paste in the associated. And again, I got to make sure I'm in the right directory. So I'm going to go into the hello. Now, if you're running these at the root directory, again, you're going to get some type of error confusion or the wrong directory. So you want to make sure that you're doing that from the right location, right? Because I'm going to the scripts deploy script, and that everything should be in place. Okay, so let me do the deployment, and we can see in the background gas used and the address is being generated externally, and also the ABI with all the JSON-based definition of my smart contract, right? So everything looks good. So final thing I'm going to do before I start getting into the event monitoring is I have to validate the app.js code. Okay, so let me go into that. And that's going to be under the source directory as usual. And I'm going to go edit app.js. And I need to update the DNS here as well. Okay. Now, I do want to point out as we're in the contract and I'm editing the code, if you look above, as I mentioned before, the contract data, hello JSON and hello address, that's going to be relied upon with each ethers.js library to identify the smart contract that I'm going to be monitoring. And interestingly, using the provider method, as I did in the original video with event logging, okay, I did both the on method with the contract as well as invoking the contract, and I deployed it in the command line as well. Here I deployed it externally and I'm writing those files externally. And as a result, the way that it is operated on from the monitoring aspect, I cannot do the deployment, or I can't do the instantiation rather of writing to the blockchain from that particular instance. Okay, but that's fine, right? We have a separation of activities, and this is really closer to how you're going to be working with advanced applications, for instance, with DeFi or monitoring any type of information on your blockchain network, right? So here, let me pull in that DNS again. And I missed the comma or the colon. I'll put that in there. But these two files and how I read them in, that's key, and we're going to use that in a second. Okay, so let me run this, and I am going to spec. I like to run npm start from the base directory, project directory, and Webpack always complains a little bit, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is the successful compile, and we're up and running, and everything looks as it should, right? So next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the DAPPs we usually have before, just to make sure everything's up and running. Nothing that we haven't done already in the day two, right? So here I'll just bring in a separate screen, and I could even run it directly from here, right? I could just go to 3000 and execute it. And let's bring up the blockchain in the background. We can see that, and I can say, hello, anything right, and it's right into the blockchain, and I can read it back. Everything's fine, it works okay, it looks all right. Okay, so let's continue on with the code to support the event monitoring. So I'm going to, again, I'm pulling it in directly from my GitHub page. And again, as before, not only from the project directory, but I want to go to source. Why? Because I don't want to bother with expansive paths to read in the ABI information, the address. Another thing to keep in mind, if I do a redeployment, I have to reinstantiate, whether it be from the command line or as a script. I have to restart it up again to reread that information that we're going to pull in right now. So let me bring up the consoles I've done in the past. And again, I like the console, it's no surprise, right? But the nice part about doing in this aspect is we can talk about as we work through, and we can see immediately the result. If there's a problem, you're going to find out, right? So let me start up the application of the on contract. I'm pulling the ethers library. I think in most cases, it may just read directly from the ethers. I may not have to do that, but let's be explicit anyway, so we know what we're doing, right? So I'm going to pull in the ABI information, and we've looked at that prior when the day one, I believe, recording. Next is the JsonRpcProvider, and I have to pull in, this is going to vary by your DNS, okay? So just don't pull in this command, you can't just cut and paste, right, in and of itself. So I'm going to pull in the beginning of it, and then I'm going to pull in the DNS, like I did with everything else. And that is the easiest thing to overlook, right? If I don't use the right DNS, or if you have other instances up and running, it's easy to confuse it, or if you're going too fast, you can overlook it, and then you're wondering, why do I have a network error? It's one of two things, either, in most cases, either my DNS, or I didn't have the security rules set up. Now, there are rare instances, I see maybe 1 out of 200, 1 out of 300, where things just don't happen to connect for reasons unbeknownst to me, okay? It doesn't happen, but on very, very infrequently. In that case, you might just want to restart the instance and try it again, okay? If something gets in some type of error state, sometimes you could have, I have seen it very rarely, and again, purpose of doing this is get you up and running with these examples, okay? As opposed to just talking about it and just sitting there nodding at a video, okay? I want you to have a complete understanding of how it's working, okay? So let's continue on here, okay? Sorry to pause that for a second there. Okay, so I'm back. And here we're going to instantiate the contract within the ethers library using the contract address, the ABI, and that provider. Now, you could easily do this to your Sepolia testnet or Ethereum mainnet or any EVM compatible network that you're interested in engaging with. So this is a great starting point to introduce yourself into the world of these behind the scenes operations of monitoring events and reacting to events on the blockchain. Maybe you're going to follow a specific contract, or perhaps the behavior of certain accounts, or any number of specific attributes. It's a wealth of information that existing on these networks, and this is a good starting point, as opposed to working with jumping immediately into a very sophisticated application. I'm going to set up a filter here again. I'm going to present more content, okay, as time permits. I'm going to have more sophisticated filtering, and you can do indexing of events. So there's a lot more levels of sophistication. This is just a starting point, okay, to get you going. Here, with the way it is set up here, I have filters my event test. Just says basically give me any event that is being generated from that particular smart contract, okay? So that's assigned to filter, and now I'm going to invoke the contract on method. It's associated with every smart contract, and I'm passing filter that method as an argument to it, and I'm going to dump the results directly to the console. Now, one thing I want to point out is we already demonstrated, I already brought up my DAPP and wrote to the contract, so it's going to come back with that first. I already generated an event, so it's not going to just sit there and wait for it. It should come back, and which it did. Okay, it gave me the result and decoded from the hex format, which we saw in prior tutorials, right? So, and you can see here, it would be sitting here for the event, and I can go back now and I can rerun let me pull up my React application back in here, which I have tapped out, and I'm going to say, hello, Al. Okay, I'm going to change that, and we can see it update as soon as not immediate, but it's going to update. And it took a couple seconds, okay, but you saw an incident came back then. Of course, I can read it from the smart contract, but I'm reading it from two different sources, right? One is reading it from the event that's being generated, and the second is reading it, the application itself is reading it directly from the blockchain. Why? Because I wrote it 2 times, okay? So there you have it. This is a good starting point. Again, you want to get a little bit deeper into reading the transaction logs and decoding the information as well as running it inline, just a variation of this being a little bit more refined application of that kind of separation of the application from the monitoring activity, which you could run standalone. You don't have to do everything in the command line. To me, it's a great way to warm up to the process and experiment, change it around. So take this and work with it and hopefully modify it to suit your needs and gain further understanding. And how do all of us learn? Okay, by modifications and changing it and gaining ownership that way. So thanks for listening. See you on the next recording. Take care. Bye now.